The alien warlord gave his crippled daughter to the strongest human slave. No one expected his choice. The warlord's palace loomed high above the scorched plains of Karzun Prime, its black spires piercing the violet sky. Smoke from the conquered cities curled around the towers, carrying the scent of fire and fear. From his throne at the center of the grand hall, the warlord surveyed the court with a gaze that could strip the courage from even the bravest warrior. His name was Ralkar, feared across dozens of star systems, a conqueror who had never known defeat. Strength was law in his empire, and weakness was treated as a disease. Those who could not fight could not survive. At his feet, a group of advisors whispered anxiously, careful not to draw attention. The subject of their discussion was a delicate one, whispered only in the shadows. The warlord's daughter, Kira, had been born strong and fierce, expected to follow in her father's footsteps. But fate had been cruel. A recent rebellion in a distant colony had left her crippled, her legs damaged beyond repair. She could no longer walk, and the court had expected her to be removed quietly from existence. In Karzun law, weakness was intolerable. The advisors had already drafted proposals to exile her, or worse, to end her life. Yet Ralkar's choice shocked them all. In a voice that carried across the hall, echoing off the black marble walls, he spoke, "I will not destroy what is mine, but she will not be left untested. She will be given to a human." The hall fell silent. Humans were considered weak, soft creatures by most alien races in the Dominion. They were enslaved, bred for labor or war, and their lives were considered worthless. To give a human the daughter of the warlord was unthinkable. Murmurs swept through the crowd. The advisors exchanged worried glances, their whispers sharper now. "Has the warlord lost his mind?" one asked in a hushed tone. "Why would he trust a human with something so precious?" Ralkar's eyes scanned the court, calm but filled with an intensity that made even the bravest warriors straighten in fear. "Do not question my judgment," he said. "This human is no ordinary slave. He is the strongest I have ever captured. And strength is what she needs." The humans in the Dominion's arenas were famed for their resilience, their refusal to break under pressure. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet they survived when no other species could. This particular human, named Jaren, had been captured from the death world of Urindor Prime, a planet where only the toughest could live. Jaren had fought in the gladiatorial arenas of 10 different star systems, each battle pushing him to the edge of death. He had won always, and yet he remained a slave because the Dominion feared what he could do if he were free. The warlord's court had never seen someone like him, someone who could look at death and smile. When Jaren was brought into the palace, the chains around his wrists clinked softly. He walked with a quiet confidence, his eyes calm but alert, taking in every detail of the alien architecture, every guard's posture, every movement in the room. The court expected him to tremble, to bow, or to plead. He did none of these. Instead, he stopped a few steps from the throne, his gaze meeting the warlord's directly. In that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The advisors stiffened, guards shifted nervously, and even the warlord himself felt a flicker of something unusual: respect. Kira sat on a platform beside her father, her small frame wrapped in ceremonial robes that hid the extent of her injuries. Her eyes, large and violet, reflected pain, fear, and a curiosity she could not suppress. She had grown up among warriors, hearing tales of strength, dominance, and the ruthless survival of the fittest. She had expected her life to be dictated by her father's will and the harsh laws of the Dominion. Yet, as she looked at Jaren, something stirred inside her. He did not look like a man who feared her. He looked human, yes, but unyielding. And in that unyielding stare, she saw a promise she could not yet understand. The warlord spoke again, his voice resonating through the hall. "This human will be your protector, Kira. He will carry you when you cannot walk, defend you when danger approaches, and ensure that no harm comes to you under my law. Those who doubt this choice will have their heads removed. Let it be known, strength is not measured by blood alone." The court erupted in whispers. Some laughed in disbelief, others shook with anger, but none dared speak openly against the warlord's command. Jaren, the human, lowered his head in acknowledgement, the slight bow practiced not out of submission but respect. In the language of the Dominion, he spoke a single word: understood. His voice was steady, carrying a calm authority that silenced the whispers for a moment. It was not a voice that asked for mercy. It was a voice that promised action. Kira tilted her head, studying him. "You are strong," she said softly, unsure if she meant his body or something deeper. Humans were said to survive impossible odds, but she had never encountered one up close. The way he moved, the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with fear, not with disgust, made her heart race with a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. "You will protect me?" she asked. Jaren's gaze met hers without hesitation. "I will not let you be hurt," he replied simply. There was no question of loyalty, no expectation of reward. It was a promise, and in it Kira sensed the truth. Humans, unlike many of her own kind, did not need titles or power to act. They acted because they chose to. The days that followed were unlike anything the palace had seen. Jaren learned to navigate the intricate corridors and deadly defenses of the Warlord's stronghold. He observed the palace guards, studied their tactics, and even anticipated potential threats. Kira, for her part, began to test him, not out of malice but out of curiosity. She tried to challenge him with tasks, hoping to find weakness, but each time, Jaren met her attempts with calm patience. He carried her across long distances, helped her reach places she thought she could never go, and never once treated her as helpless. Slowly, she began to trust him, though she did not fully understand why. The court watched in disbelief. A human slave who did not break under pressure, who did not seek to escape, who treated the warlord's daughter with respect. This was unprecedented. Some speculated that Jaren had some hidden power, some secret advantage, but no one could prove it. The truth was simpler. The human understood something that the Karzun warriors did not. Strength was not always measured in victory over others. Sometimes, strength was measured in care, in protection, in refusing to abandon someone when it would be easier to turn away. Word spread quickly throughout the palace. The rival factions who had hoped to see Kira erased began to doubt their plans. The human's reputation grew, and with it, the quiet realization that perhaps the warlord had made a decision wiser than anyone could comprehend. For Kira, every day was a revelation. She had lived in a world where survival depended on cruelty, where only the strongest could live, where weakness meant death. Now she saw that there was another kind of strength, a quiet, steadfast strength that did not demand obedience, did not inspire fear, and yet was unshakable. One evening, as the violet twin moons rose above the palace towers, Jaren helped Kira to the balcony overlooking the city. She had been silent, watching the smoke and the fires from the conquered colonies. "Do you ever fear?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jaren looked out at the horizon, his expression calm. "Fear is natural," he said, "but I do not let it control me. I act despite fear." His words were simple, but they carried a weight Kira had never felt. For the first time in her life, she realized that she could face the world not just as a crippled child of a warlord, but as someone protected, guided, and inspired by true strength. The court continued to murmur, warriors and advisors whispering about the strange bond forming between human and princess. Some were outraged, others fascinated. But the warlord watched silently from his throne, eyes narrow but thoughtful. In his empire, he had conquered thousands, destroyed armies, and shaped worlds. Yet in this human, he saw something that even he could not command. It was a form of strength he had never understood, a quiet defiance that did not threaten him but demanded respect. For the first time, Ralkar considered that perhaps the galaxy held lessons even he had yet to learn. Days turned into weeks, and the human continued his work, training the princess in ways the court could not fully understand. He taught her to move, to balance, to anticipate danger, and to trust her instincts. She learned not through fear, not through punishment, but through encouragement and patience. The palace, built on fear and dominance, seemed almost alive with a new energy. Those who observed began to notice subtle changes. The guards were less cruel, the advisors more cautious in their schemes, and even the princess began to smile, a rare and fleeting gift in a place so steeped in discipline and war. Then one morning, the human received news that a rival faction had sent assassins to test Kira's protection. Without hesitation, he prepared, checking every detail, every possible weakness. Kira watched him silently, understanding now that the strength of a human did not lie in sheer power alone, but in preparation, observation, and the refusal to yield. When the assassins came, Jaren was ready. He moved with precision, defending Kira without hesitation, ensuring that no harm came to her. By the time the palace guards arrived, the threat had been neutralized, and the human stood, not triumphant, but steady, his eyes calm, surveying the aftermath. Kira looked at him with newfound respect. "You did not even hesitate," she said, "even when you were outnumbered." Jaren shook his head. "I protect you because it is the right thing to do," he replied. "Not because it is easy, not because it will bring reward. Because it must be done." The words resonated within her, echoing through a mind that had never known such unwavering loyalty. She realized, finally, that the galaxy was bigger than conquest, bigger than fear. There were choices that even the strongest warlord could not force. And sometimes the smallest actions, the quietest promises, held more power than armies. From the throne, Rhalkar watched, silent and contemplative. The decision he had made, one that had shocked his entire court, was proving its worth in ways he had not anticipated. In the strength of a human, he saw the possibility of a new kind of rule, a rule not built solely on fear and dominance, but on respect, courage, and loyalty. For the first time in his long life of war and conquest, the warlord felt the stirrings of something he had never known: hope. After the attempt on Kira's life, the palace had grown more alert. Guards patrolled the halls with sharper attention, and the advisors whispered endlessly about the human who had protected the princess. Jaren, however, paid little attention to politics or gossip. His focus was singular: ensure Kira's safety and teach her to survive in a world that valued strength above all. Kira, for her part, had changed in ways no one in the court expected. Before, she had relied entirely on others, her attendants, her father's warriors, and the palace guards, to move her from one place to another. But now, under Jaren's guidance, she began to take small steps toward independence. Using braces and specially crafted supports, he trained her legs to bear her weight, even if only for short distances. At first, it was slow and painful. Her muscles protested, her joints ached, and frustration often brought tears. But Jaren never rushed her. His patience was unyielding and his voice calm, always repeating the same words. "Strength is not always in speed. It is in persistence. Keep trying, you will succeed." His presence was different from everyone she had known. Where the court demanded perfection or punished mistakes, Jaren encouraged growth. He celebrated the smallest victories, a step across a chamber, reaching out for a railing without support. Slowly, Kira began to understand that strength was not something inherited from birth or granted by bloodlines. It was built day by day through determination and endurance. As the weeks passed, Jaren became more than a protector. He became a teacher and a guide. He introduced Kira to techniques that were unusual for a princess of the Karzun dominion. She learned how to read the patterns of movement around her, to sense potential threats before they arrived, and to think strategically even while in pain. The court found these lessons strange, and some advisors began to fear that the princess was becoming too independent, too capable for their control. They whispered about Jaren behind closed doors, questioning the wisdom of the warlord in giving the human such influence. But the warlord himself remained silent, watching from his throne as the bond between human and daughter grew stronger. He had expected obedience from the human, perhaps even arrogance. What he had not expected was the subtle shift of power that came from trust. In the human's quiet confidence, the warlord saw the beginnings of something he had never considered. A child, crippled and underestimated, could become strong in ways no one had imagined. One morning, Kira attempted her first independent walk without relying on Jaren to support her. She held a wooden staff that Jaren had crafted to help with balance. Every step was cautious, each movement calculated. Her face was pale from effort, her brow furrowed in concentration. The court gathered in silence, curious and skeptical. Would she fall? Would the human fail in his duty? Step by step, she moved forward. Her legs trembled, and a gasp escaped from one of the attending guards, but she did not give up. Jaren followed closely behind, ready to catch her if she fell, but his hands remained idle, a sign of confidence. With each step, Kira's heart swelled with pride. She had been taught that weakness was shameful, that her body's limitations defined her worth. Yet here she was, defying expectations, proving that strength could be found in persistence. By the time she reached the center of the hall, the court erupted in astonished applause. Even the warlord inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the victory in silence. It was during these lessons that danger returned, not in the form of a full-scale attack, but in subtler ways. Rival factions within the palace began plotting against Kira, seeing her growing independence as a threat. Assassins sent in disguise attempted to infiltrate her chambers. Jaren, ever vigilant, anticipated their movements, intercepting them before they could strike. He moved like a shadow, silent and precise, yet he never allowed Kira to witness fear in his actions. Instead, she saw calm, confidence, and unwavering protection. The human taught her that threats were not always avoided by strength alone, but by awareness and preparation. One afternoon, after thwarting a particularly daring attempt, Jaren sat with Kira in the palace gardens. The alien plants, with their glowing leaves and shifting colors, swayed in the gentle breeze. Kira leaned on her staff, exhausted but proud. "You never seem afraid," she said quietly. "I am," Jaren replied, his voice calm. "But fear is not a reason to do nothing. It is a reason to act carefully. Courage is acting despite fear, not ignoring it." Kira absorbed his words, realizing that she had begun to think differently about her own life. Her father had always taught her that strength was in domination, in crushing enemies, in demanding obedience. But the human showed her another path. Strength could be quiet, patient, and protective. It could be built from care rather than conquest. The next challenge came not from within the palace, but from the galaxy outside. News arrived that a coalition of neighboring warlords had learned of the warlord's crippled daughter and saw an opportunity to strike. They believed the Karzun Dominion could be destabilized if the princess was removed. The warlord called a council of his generals. Weapons were prepared, defenses strengthened, and spies sent to infiltrate enemy ranks. Yet he did not summon Jaren as a mere guard. Instead, he commanded him to train Kira in survival tactics and strategy. The court was stunned. They expected a human slave to follow orders, not instruct a princess on matters of war and diplomacy. Jaren accepted the responsibility without hesitation. He began teaching Kira the ways of survival beyond physical strength. How to anticipate attacks, how to read intentions, how to move with purpose even when her body limited her. He showed her techniques to escape dangerous situations, to remain calm under pressure, and to think strategically when surrounded by enemies. The lessons were exhausting and often painful, but Kira grew stronger with each passing day. Her confidence began to show in the court. No longer did she sit silently in ceremonies. She began asking questions, offering suggestions, and even correcting minor errors in the strategies presented by her father's generals. Some courtiers scoffed, others were impressed, but all took notice. The daughter of the warlord, once seen as a liability, was slowly transforming into a formidable presence. Jaren watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. He never claimed credit, never sought praise, but he saw the change in her posture, the spark in her eyes, and the steadiness in her voice. The human's influence was subtle but profound. Kira's strength was growing not through domination or fear, but through understanding, resilience, and trust. One evening, the warlord summoned both of them to the training hall. The walls of the chamber were lined with holographic projections of battlefields from across the galaxy. Ralkar spoke in a voice that resonated with authority. "The trials are coming," he said. "Rival warlords will test us. I will allow no failure. You human have shown unexpected skill, but the true test is yet to come. Protect my daughter, train her, and prove that strength lies not only in arms but in wisdom." Jaren bowed slightly. "I will do as you command," he said. But even as he spoke, he understood something deeper. This was not just a test for him or Kira, it was a test for the entire empire. The warlord had begun to see that his daughter's survival could teach the Dominion a lesson long ignored. That true strength was not only in conquest, but in protection, in guidance, and in the courage to care for those others consider weak. The weeks that followed were filled with rigorous training. Kira learned to use her staff not just for support, but as a weapon. She learned to anticipate attacks, read enemy movements, and maintain balance even in unstable conditions. Jaren pushed her gently but firmly, always reminding her that mistakes were not failures but lessons. Slowly, Kira began to trust her body, trust her mind, and most importantly, trust herself. Word of her progress reached the neighboring warlords. Whispers traveled faster than ships, carrying tales of a crippled princess who walked, fought, and strategized like a seasoned warrior, all under the guidance of a human slave. The coalition that had planned to attack began to hesitate, unsure if they underestimated the Karzun Dominion. Rumors of the human's cunning spread, his reputation growing not just as a fighter, but as a strategist and teacher. One day, Kira spoke to Jaren while overlooking the training fields. "Do you think they will attack?" she asked. "They may try," he replied. "But we are ready. Strength is not just in fighting. It is in preparation, in knowing what others cannot see, and in trusting those who fight beside you." Kira nodded, understanding finally the depth of his words. She had learned that being protected did not mean being weak. She had learned that strength could be cultivated, nurtured, and grown, even from someone unexpected, like a human slave. And so, as the sun set over the palace and the violet skies deepened into night, the daughter of the warlord walked across the terrace with Jaren by her side. She had not yet reached the full measure of her potential, but she had taken the first steps toward independence, resilience, and true strength. The court whispered, the guards watched, and the empire waited. But in the quiet moments between training and duty, Kira realized something profound. Strength was not just power. It was the courage to rise, to endure, and to trust. And the human beside her had shown her all of these things. The news came like a storm across the Karzun Dominion. Rival warlords had formed a coalition, united in their belief that the crippled daughter of the greatest conqueror was a symbol of weakness. They planned to strike the capital of Karzun Prime, hoping to end the warlord's lineage and destabilize his empire. The council convened immediately, generals and advisors arguing over tactics, defenses, and the speed of reinforcements. But in the center of all the noise, Ralka remained silent, his eyes fixed on his daughter and the human who had become her guardian. Jaren had anticipated this moment. From the first day he had met Kira, he had trained her not just to walk, not just to fight, but to think strategically. He knew that threats rarely came openly. They came in disguise, in timing, in moments when the weak least expected. He began a new phase of training, one that tested Kira's mind as much as her body. She had learned balance, strength, and endurance, but now she would learn observation, decision-making, and anticipation. They started with the palace itself. Jaren led Kira through secret corridors, unused chambers, and narrow staircases, teaching her to move quietly and recognize points of vulnerability. "A warrior is not always where the enemy sees him," he said. "A protector is not always visible. You must know your space, know your paths, and understand how to survive before you even pick up a weapon." Kira listened carefully, her eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, every unexpected sound. She felt her confidence grow with every lesson, and for the first time, fear did not dominate her thoughts. The next stage was preparation for combat. Jaren arranged mock ambushes within the palace grounds, hiding behind pillars, using simple traps, and timing Kira's movements so she could anticipate threats before they arrived. The princess stumbled at first, nearly falling or miscalculating her steps. But Jaren never scolded her. Instead, he offered guidance, corrections, and encouragement. "Mistakes are not defeat," he reminded her. "They are lessons. The strongest warriors are those who learn from failure, not those who never fail." Kira began to surprise herself. She realized that even crippled, even limited, she could outthink her opponents. She could sense movement before it happened, anticipate the pattern of attack, and respond with precision. She felt a surge of pride she had never known. The court, which had observed these sessions from a distance, began to murmur in awe. The human slave was shaping a princess who could survive on her own, who could challenge expectations, and who could become a figure of strength that the galaxy would not ignore. But the challenge was not just within the palace. Scouts reported that the coalition's forces were approaching the outer territories, and spies indicated that assassins had infiltrated smaller outposts. Jaren knew they would come not only for the princess, but for him, seeing him as the weak link despite his strength. He began teaching Kira how to defend herself even when he was not nearby. He showed her techniques to evade attacks, ways to use the environment to her advantage, and the importance of remaining calm under pressure. "Strength without thought is only brute force," he said. "Brute force can be overcome, thought, awareness, and courage cannot." Kira took his lessons seriously. She practiced tirelessly, learning to stand her ground even when her body screamed in pain. She learned that every movement mattered, every choice had a consequence, and every decision could mean survival or death. Her legs, though still crippled, became stronger, her balance more precise, and her confidence unshakable. Even the warlord's most loyal generals began to notice that the princess was no longer a liability, but a potential leader. As the coalition's forces drew closer, Jaren prepared Kira for a trial she had never imagined. A test not only of her physical abilities but of her courage, her decision-making, and her resilience. The rival warlords had demanded proof that the daughter of Rhalkar was worthy of protection, sending a champion to challenge her and her human guardian. It was not just a fight. It was a spectacle, a test designed to humiliate, to assert dominance, and to break morale. When the day arrived, the arena was packed with onlookers. The rival champion, a towering alien warrior with multiple limbs and sharpened claws, sneered at Kira and Jaren. The crowd expected the human to be overpowered, to fall, leaving the princess exposed. But Jaren stood calmly, his gaze steady, analyzing the champion's stance, noting weaknesses, and preparing for the inevitable strike. Kira watched him, remembering every lesson he had taught her, every strategy they had discussed, and every moment he had encouraged her to rise despite fear. The battle began with a roar. The champion lunged with incredible speed, striking at Jaren with precision. Jaren moved fluidly, dodging and countering, using the champion's momentum against him. Kira followed his instructions, positioning herself carefully, moving when necessary, and using the environment to her advantage. Though she did not strike the champion directly, her choices influenced the flow of the battle, guiding Jaren and creating openings. The fight was brutal. Jaren took blows that would have killed most humans, yet he never faltered. He remained calm, precise, and relentless, each movement calculated. Kira, though not physically striking, felt the weight of responsibility. Every decision she made, where to move, when to act, when to stay still, could determine the outcome. The crowd gasped as she anticipated the champion's attacks, signaling Jaren at the right moment and altering the flow of the fight. Hours seemed to pass in mere minutes. The rival champion was strong, cunning, and ruthless. Yet against the human and the princess, he faltered. Jaren's endurance, combined with Kira's growing awareness, created a synergy the coalition had not anticipated. They moved as one, protecting each other, anticipating attacks, and exploiting weaknesses. For the first time, the onlookers witnessed not brute strength alone, but a partnership built on trust, courage, and strategy. Finally, the champion was forced to retreat, exhausted and humiliated. Jaren stood, breathing heavily, his body battered but unbroken. Kira's legs trembled with the effort of constant vigilance, but her eyes shone with pride. The crowd erupted in astonished applause, and even the warlord inclined his head, acknowledging the victory. After the battle, Kira approached Jaren. I never thought I could do that," she admitted. "Even standing there, I felt strong." Jaren smiled, his face calm despite fatigue. "You were strong all along," he said. "I only helped you see it. Strength is not in what others think of you. It is in what you choose to do, even when fear is all around." The warlord's advisors whispered furiously among themselves. They had expected failure, humiliation, and proof that the human was expendable. Instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. A crippled princess standing strong, guided by a human who acted not out of obedience, but out of choice, courage, and unwavering dedication. In the following days, the coalition's forces hesitated. They had underestimated the princess and the human, and rumors of the battle spread faster than ships could travel. Whispers reached distant worlds. The daughter of Rhalkar was not weak. She was resilient, intelligent, and capable. And the human who protected her was not a simple slave, but a strategist, a warrior, and a teacher. Jaren continued his work quietly, focusing on preparation rather than celebration. He taught Kira how to read enemy movements, how to predict tactics, and how to remain calm under pressure. Each lesson brought new challenges, each exercise pushing them both to the limits. Kira grew stronger not just in body but in mind, understanding the value of patience, observation, and careful planning. One night, as they overlooked the glowing city below, Kira spoke softly. "Do you think they will ever understand what we are?" "They may never understand," Jaren replied, his voice steady. "But that does not matter. Understanding is not required for strength to exist. You do not need their approval. You only need to know what is right and act with courage." Kira absorbed his words, feeling a warmth she had never known. For the first time, she realized that her strength did not come from her father, her title, or her bloodline. It came from within, nurtured by courage, guidance, and trust. She had survived battles, assassination attempts, and doubt. She had learned to rise despite fear, to act despite weakness, and to trust in those who chose to fight alongside her. The warlord, observing silently from his chambers, began to reconsider his empire's approach. He had conquered countless worlds, destroyed enemies without mercy, and ruled with fear. Yet here, before his eyes, was proof that strength could come in forms he had never considered. The human, the princess, and their bond demonstrated a lesson long ignored. Courage, loyalty, and wisdom could match or surpass brute power. As the nights passed, Kira's skills continued to grow. She learned to move with speed despite her limitations, to anticipate attacks before they happened, and to act with precision when needed. Jaren continued to guide her, teaching subtle techniques of strategy, defense, and resilience. The palace, once dominated by fear and strict hierarchy, began to shift in quiet ways. Guards observed the human and princess with respect, rather than disdain. Advisors whispered cautiously, acknowledging the growing power of the pair. When scouts finally returned with news of the coalition's delay, the human and princess prepared for the next challenge. Jaren spoke calmly, his voice carrying both reassurance and expectation. "This is only the beginning. Strength is tested not once, but many times. You must be ready for what comes next. Always watch, always learn, always endure." Kira nodded, her violet eyes shining. She understood now that survival was not about fear or weakness. It was about preparation, courage, and the bond between those who fought together. And beside her stood Jaren, the human who had shown her that strength could come in the most unexpected forms. Together, they were no longer simply protector and protected. They were partners, strategists, and a force that no enemy could easily overcome. The galaxy was watching. And for the first time, many began to wonder, could a human, once considered weak and expendable, redefine the very meaning of strength? The coalition's forces had grown restless. Days stretched into weeks as scouts reported slow advances, rumors of spies, and the constant threat of ambush. Within the walls of the Karzun Palace, the tension was palpable. Even the courtiers who had once whispered of weakness now moved cautiously, aware that the human and the princess had proven their capabilities. Jaren spent every waking moment preparing Kira for the inevitable. The training was harder now, designed not just to build strength, but endurance, courage, and decision-making under extreme pressure. Kira was learning quickly. Her steps had grown steadier, her stamina stronger, and her understanding of strategy deeper than anyone in the palace had expected. Yet the pressure weighed heavily on her. Every mistake, every moment of hesitation could lead to disaster. She found herself doubting herself more than ever, even as her body and mind became stronger. One evening, as the violet twin moons rose above the palace towers, she spoke quietly to Jaren while walking through the training fields. "I feel afraid," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "I have learned to walk, to anticipate attacks, to fight, but what if it is not enough? What if I fail?" Jaren looked at her, calm as always, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the moons. "Fear is not the enemy," he said. "It is the signal that you care. Courage is not the absence of fear, Kira. It is acting despite it. You have already proven your strength by choosing to stand, by choosing to rise each day. That is what others will never understand." Her violet eyes met his, searching for reassurance. She realized that his words were not empty promises, they were truth born from experience. He had faced death countless times, endured suffering far greater than she had ever known, yet he remained unbroken. And now he was teaching her the most important lesson. Strength was not measured in victory alone, but in persistence, in resilience, and in the courage to continue even when the odds were impossible. The warning came suddenly. Scouts reported that the coalition had split their forces. A large strike team was heading straight for the capital, hoping to take the princess by surprise. Another team, smaller but highly skilled, was already inside the outer territories, planning to infiltrate the palace. Jaren knew this would be the ultimate test of Kira's training. This was not a controlled environment. This was real. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. The warlord called a council. Generals and advisors debated tactics furiously, some insisting on a full-scale counterattack, others advocating for diplomacy or traps. Ralkar's gaze, however, remained on the human and the princess. He knew that brute force alone might not save them. The human had proven his value time and again, not just in combat, but in strategy and preparation. If the coalition was to be stopped, it would be through the combination of courage, skill, and foresight that Jaren had instilled in Kira. Jaren and Kira spent the night preparing. They reviewed the palace's defenses, memorized escape routes, and created contingency plans for every possible scenario. Kira had grown more confident, yet she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Every choice mattered now. One misstep could cost lives, not just her own but those of her father, the palace guards, and everyone who relied on her. When the attack came, it was swift and precise. The first wave of coalition soldiers attempted to breach the outer gates, expecting minimal resistance. Jaren had anticipated this. Using a combination of traps, barricades, and clever maneuvers, he and Kira redirected the attackers, buying time for the palace defenses to mobilize. Kira moved with surprising agility, using her staff not just for support but to block, redirect, and counter the enemy's attacks. She had learned to think ahead, to anticipate movements, and to act decisively. Every choice she made influenced the flow of the battle, and each successful maneuver strengthened her confidence. Yet the battle was far from over. The second wave, composed of elite assassins and infiltrators, had already entered the inner chambers. Their goal was clear: reach the princess and eliminate her. Jaren guided Kira through secret passages, silently communicating plans and strategies. They moved like shadows, avoiding direct confrontation until necessary, using patience and precision to survive. The hallways of the palace became a maze of tension, strategy, and calculated risk. At one point, Kira nearly fell while navigating a narrow corridor. Jaren caught her just in time, his grip steady, his voice calm. "Keep moving," he urged. "Every step matters. Do not let fear decide your actions." Kira nodded, her heart pounding, her legs trembling, yet she continued. The fear remained, but it no longer controlled her. She acted with focus, precision, and determination, proving that her training had not only built strength in her body but resilience in her mind. They reached the main chamber, where a small squad of assassins had cornered them. Jaren assessed the situation quickly. There was no room for error. He moved with fluid precision, intercepting attacks before they could reach Kira. She followed his guidance, using her staff to block and redirect, positioning herself strategically. Together, they moved as one, guardian and ward, protector and protected, anticipating each strike, countering with accuracy, and maintaining their focus under extreme pressure. The battle was intense, every second stretching into eternity. Kira's legs ached, her body screamed, yet she did not stop. She remembered Jaren's words, the lessons he had taught her, and the countless hours of training they had endured together. Each decision, each movement was informed by strategy, observation, and trust. She realized that true strength was not about overpowering the enemy alone. It was about endurance, awareness, and using every advantage wisely. After what felt like hours, the palace was secure. The assassins were either captured, incapacitated, or forced to retreat. The coalition's forces had been repelled, their plan thwarted. Jaren, though exhausted and bruised, remained steady. Kira, though trembling and covered in sweat and dust, stood taller than she had ever imagined. The human had protected her, but she had also contributed, using her mind, strategy, and growing strength to survive. As they caught their breath, Kira looked at Jaren. "We did it," she said, her voice trembling but filled with pride. "Yes," he replied, his eyes calm but attentive. "And we will do it again if necessary. But remember, strength is not measured by one battle alone. It is measured by the courage to face what comes next, no matter the cost." The palace staff and guards watched silently, all replacing skepticism. They had witnessed the unexpected, a crippled princess surviving not by brute force alone, but through intelligence, preparation, and the guidance of a human slave. Even the warlord Ralkar observed quietly from his throne, a rare expression of approval in his eyes. He had expected obedience from the human, perhaps even arrogance. Instead, he saw courage, patience, and wisdom that no weapon could achieve. In the days that followed, Kira's confidence grew. She walked more easily, moved more strategically, and began to anticipate threats before they arose. Jaren continued to guide her, refining her techniques and strengthening her mind as much as her body. The court, once skeptical, began to respect her resilience, and whispers of her abilities spread beyond the palace walls. The coalition, realizing that their initial attacks had failed, became increasingly frustrated. Their spies reported that Kira and Jaren were not only surviving, but thriving under pressure, growing stronger with each encounter. Their reputation spread across the galaxy, creating hesitation, doubt, and fear among those who had once believed the Karzun Dominion to be vulnerable. One night, as they surveyed the stars from the palace balcony, Kira spoke softly to Jaren. "Do you think we will ever be truly safe?" Jaren's gaze remained steady, fixed on the distant horizon. "Safety is an illusion," he said, "but courage, preparation, and trust, these are real. They will guide you through what lies ahead." Kira absorbed his words, realizing that her journey was far from over. She had survived attacks, assassination attempts, and overwhelming odds. She had learned to rise despite fear, to act despite weakness, and to trust in those who fought alongside her. Each lesson had strengthened her body, mind, and spirit. And through it all, Jaren had remained steadfast, guiding her, protecting her, and showing her the true meaning of strength. The Warlord, observing from his chambers, reflected on what he had witnessed. His daughter, once seen as a liability, had become a symbol of resilience and courage. The human, once considered a disposable slave, had demonstrated wisdom, strategy, and unwavering loyalty. Together, they had proven a simple truth. Strength was not only measured by conquest or fear, but by courage, endurance, and the willingness to act in the face of impossible odds. In the days that followed, the palace returned to a tense calm. Preparations continued for the inevitable larger conflict with the coalition, but there was a new energy in the air. Guards moved with purpose, advisors spoke with caution, and the princess walked with growing confidence. Kira had learned that her body's limitations did not define her worth. Strength, she realized, came from persistence, courage, and trust in those who chose to stand with her. And at the center of it all stood Jaren, the human who had shown her that even the weakest could rise, even the powerless could endure, and even the unlikely could change the course of destiny. Together, they had not only survived the first major threat, they had laid the foundation for a future where courage, strategy, and unwavering loyalty would define true strength. The galaxy watched quietly, unaware that the lessons learned within the walls of the Karzun Palace would soon ripple outward, changing the perception of humans forever. In the heart of the Dominion, amid danger, fear, and expectation, the crippled princess and the human slave had begun to rewrite what it meant to be strong. The dawn broke over Karzun Prime, painting the palace towers with shades of violet and gold. The air was tense, heavy with anticipation. Scouts had returned with alarming reports. The coalition, frustrated by their previous failures, was preparing a massive assault. Unlike before, this was no small raid. Tens of thousands of soldiers, elite war machines, and cunning tacticians were heading toward the capital. The Warlord summoned his generals, advisors, and the human, Jaren. Ralkar, his black armor glinting in the early light, spoke without raising his voice. "The coalition believes they can strike us down. They see weakness where there is none. Today we will prove them wrong. But understand this is not only a battle of weapons. It is a test of courage, strategy, and unity. The daughter of my blood will not be left unprotected. And you, human, will stand by her side." Jaren nodded, calm as ever. "I will protect her," he said. His voice carried quiet authority. He had anticipated this moment for months, trained for it, prepared Kira for it. The difference now was that she was ready. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident with each passing day. Kira looked at Jaren, her violet eyes steady and determined. "I'm ready," she said, "not just to survive, but to fight." The Warlord allowed a brief nod of approval before the preparations began. The palace defenders mobilized, strategically positioning soldiers, fortifying walls, and activating defensive mechanisms that Jaren had helped plan. He worked tirelessly with Kira, moving her through battle drills, coordinating escape routes, and reviewing strategy for every possible scenario. She no longer relied entirely on him to guide her. Instead, she participated in planning, offering suggestions, analyzing enemy movement, and making decisions with clarity and precision. The first wave of the coalition arrived just as the twin suns rose higher in the sky. The sight of their massive forces stretched across the plains was intimidating, even for the seasoned warriors of Karzun Prime. Massive war machines rumbled forward, soldiers shouted commands in alien languages, and the ground trembled beneath the approach of their forces. Jaren remained calm, his eyes scanning the horizon, noting the positions of the enemy, predicting their strategies. Kira, standing beside him, had her staff ready, her braces supporting her legs, but her mind sharper than ever. She could anticipate enemy maneuvers, recognize weaknesses in formations, and make split-second decisions that could save lives. Together, they became a unit that was more than just protector and protected. They were a team, their minds and instincts in perfect synchrony. The first clash was brutal. Cannon fire shook the outer walls, and the palace defenders engaged in close combat with enemy soldiers attempting to breach the gates. Jaren moved like a shadow, intercepting attackers, redirecting projectiles, and ensuring Kira's safety. She followed his instructions precisely, guiding reinforcements, signaling weak points, and even stepping forward when necessary to block or disrupt enemy soldiers. Her movements were precise, calculated, and purposeful. Each action inspired the troops around her, giving them courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Hours passed in a relentless storm of fire, steel, and determination. The coalition underestimated the combined strength of the Warlord's forces and the human princess team. Jaren's strategies, paired with Kira's growing awareness and decisiveness, turned the tide in ways no one expected. Enemy units were trapped in ambushes, flanked by coordinated movements, and forced to retreat under the pressure of calculated defense. In the midst of battle, Kira faced her most personal challenge. A squad of elite assassins broke through the palace defenses, heading directly for her. Jaren moved to intercept, but Kira acted before he could speak. She used the lessons he had taught her, anticipating the movements of her attackers, guiding them into a narrow corridor where the architecture gave her an advantage. Using her staff to leverage momentum and block attacks, she managed to incapacitate the lead assassin. Her confidence surged, and for the first time she realized that she was no longer merely protected. She could actively defend herself, protect others, and contribute meaningfully to the fight. Jaren watched her with pride, his calm demeanor never wavering. "You have become strong," he said quietly, as if the noise of battle had not erupted around them. "Stronger than you realize." The coalition's command structure began to crumble. Their forces, expecting to exploit weakness, now faced resistance at every turn. The princess, once considered fragile and expendable, had become a symbol of resilience and courage. The human who had once been a slave now led, strategized, and acted with precision that rivaled the finest generals of the galaxy. Even the warlord Ralkar observed from the throne room, noting each movement, each decision, and each act of courage. He had built an empire on fear, domination, and strength measured in power over others. Yet here, in the chaos of battle, he saw a different kind of strength, one built on wisdom, trust, and unwavering courage. The human and the princess together embodied a form of power that could not be measured by weapons alone. As the battle reached its peak, a massive war machine of the coalition breached the outer defenses, heading straight for the palace. Its weapons could decimate walls and soldiers alike. Jaren assessed the threat quickly. "We cannot fight it head-on," he said. "We need to guide it into the trap we prepared." Kira nodded, her mind calculating, her movements decisive. Together, they led the war machine into a concealed chamber filled with destabilizing energy fields. With precision, the machine was trapped and destroyed, the force of its destruction creating a shockwave that repelled the remaining enemy soldiers. The battle ended as the sun began to set. The coalition's forces, broken and demoralized, retreated, leaving the palace and its defenders victorious. The cost had been high, with casualties on both sides, but the victory was undeniable. Kira, exhausted yet exhilarated, stood with Jaren, her staff in hand, her body and mind strengthened through the trial. She had faced fear, pain, and impossible odds, and had prevailed. The court erupted in celebration, though whispers of astonishment and admiration filled the halls. Advisors and generals approached the warlord, acknowledging the human's contributions, the princess's courage, and the unprecedented partnership that had turned the tide. Ralkar, who had once ruled with fear, now found himself observing a new kind of power, one that combined courage, wisdom, and loyalty in ways that no weapon could replicate. Kira turned to Jaren, her violet eyes shining with gratitude and pride. "We did it," she said softly. "We survived together." Jaren smiled, though fatigue weighed on him. "Yes," he replied, "but remember, strength is not measured by a single victory. It is measured by what you do with it, by how you protect those who cannot protect themselves, and by how you rise each day despite the odds." The warlord approached them then, his imposing figure casting a long shadow. He looked at his daughter, and then at the human who had changed the course of the battle. "You have both proven something that even I did not expect," he said, his voice resonating with authority and respect. "Strength is not only in conquest or fear. It is in courage, loyalty, and the willingness to act when it matters most. Kira, you have grown beyond expectation. And you, human, you have shown that even the underestimated can become indispensable." For the first time, Jaren bowed not out of fear or obedience, but in acknowledgement of the warlord's words. The respect was mutual, unspoken yet profound. The bond between human and princess had reshaped not only their own lives, but had also begun to reshape the empire itself. In the weeks that followed, the Karzun Dominion stabilized. The coalition, humbled by their defeat, retreated and reconsidered their ambitions. Kira continued her training, not merely for survival, but to lead, to inspire, and to teach others the lessons she had learned. That courage, wisdom, and perseverance could surpass brute force. Jaren remained by her side, guiding, protecting, and teaching, yet always allowing her to grow independently. The palace, once a place of fear and domination, became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of unexpected strength. The story of the crippled princess and the human who had protected her spread across the galaxy. Rumors and tales of their courage inspired humans and aliens alike. Humans, once considered weak, were now seen in a new light, capable, resilient, and courageous beyond measure. And Kira, once underestimated, became a beacon of hope, proof that strength could be nurtured, developed, and cultivated, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. One evening, as the stars shone over the palace, Kira and Jaren stood on the highest balcony. The galaxy stretched endlessly before them, filled with unknown challenges, opportunities, and adventures. Kira leaned on her staff, her legs strong, her mind sharp, and her heart filled with confidence. She turned to Jaren, a smile on her face that reflected pride, gratitude, and determination. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Jaren looked at her, calm as ever, his eyes reflecting the soft starlight. "You earned it," he replied. "I only showed you what was already inside you. Strength was never just mine to give. It was always yours to claim." The warlord, observing silently from his chambers, allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. His empire was vast, his power unmatched, yet the lessons he had witnessed in the human and his daughter were worth more than all conquests combined. He realized that true leadership was not only in ruling with fear, but in recognizing, nurturing, and protecting strength wherever it might be found, even in the most unexpected places. And so, the crippled princess and the human who had protected her continued their journey together. They had faced impossible odds, conquered fear, and reshaped the perception of strength across the galaxy. Their bond, forged in trust, courage, and resilience, became a legend, a story of hope, determination, and the power of the underestimated. The galaxy, once filled with doubt and prejudice, began to see a new truth. Courage, loyalty, and wisdom could surpass any weapon, any army, and any expectation. And in the heart of Karzun Prime, a human and a princess had proven that the smallest acts of bravery could echo across the stars, changing the fate of worlds and inspiring generations to come. Together they stood, not as protector and ward, not as master and slave, but as equals, partners, and symbols of a future where strength was measured not by dominance, but by courage, resilience, and the willingness to act in the face of impossible odds. The galaxy would never forget their story,